Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of our Creator Conversation series. I'm very excited to have my aunt here, who we tend not to get along, so she's doing this as a favor to me. But she is a cinematographer in Bollywood, the most badass woman cinematographer, underwater cinematographer, and she's also the executive director over at Alora Studios. She's had over 20 years of experience at this point, been in the industry longer than I've been alive. And she's got a pretty interesting journey of what it's like to be a woman behind a camera in India. And I'm excited to have her on today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. Episode 1.
Episode
That's exactly
1.
where it should be, and you'd be in trouble if I wasn't.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. If I
that
got some random person.
exactly.
So the one I wanted to start, and I just wanted to hear a little bit about what was the attraction to film initially. I know you had, upped out of India and went to NYU for film school, but it's a big decision to make to, uproot your life for 6 months and go to school in a different country. What allowed you to do that? What motivated you? What were some of the factors?
I think, at least when we were younger, and it's been a while since I was young, but I didn't think about it so deeply. I really wanted to do it, and that's all I could think about. So it wasn't a big life decision in that sense, where it was like, I'm going to change everything and uproot my life and go study film and then come back. I'm a woman. What's it going to? None of that really mattered. I wanted to do it. I went out and did it, and I think ignorance is a really good thing at some point because I
Hmm.
think if I knew as much as I know now about women in the film industry and cinematography in particular, I think maybe I wouldn't have ventured on that journey because when I came back to India to start working, I was the only female cinematographer in the country at that point. There was another assistant, and I started out as an assistant, as an AC.
Hmm.
But she quit very quickly. She got married and had a child. So that left me at that moment being the only one. But I didn't know it because I don't think there was that much communication at that point. You didn't really know what was happening outside your little world. So I just did what I wanted to do. That's how it
Hmm.
started.
Interesting. And did you have sort of that interest in film before, or was it something that was cultivated over the years?
So it's not, we weren't a household that really grew up watching too many films. It wasn't cinemas went to the movies, but it wasn't that, it wasn't kind of academic or it wasn't like a weekly thing as well. It was also, so I think what to me in my summer jobs when I was in college was at a production house in Bombay.
Hmm.
And that's where I kind of got interested in filmmaking. And I think it's an interesting career if you have, I think, peripheral or borderline ADHD. I don't. But I think if you're interested in 100 things, jack of all trades, it's
Right.
a really interesting profession because you get to learn a bit of science, art, math, literature, uh, every possible thing,
Uh-huh.
technology. So it's a very interesting amalgamation of all these various, all these various, well, fields or disciplines. And for someone who isn't that narrowly focused on, say, science or the arts or any particular thing, it's a great place. A film set is very exciting because you really do get to dabble in everything a little by little. So I think that's what drew me to it.
Right. So now the question, I guess, as we get to film school, you'd gone to film school at NYU. Do you learn more on set or in film school? That's what everyone really wants to know.
So, I mean, how do you compare 6 months of learning with about 23 years of
Yeah.
experience? And it's not that I get onto a set even now and I know everything. It's such a dynamic profession. Every set is different, every day is different,
Hmm.
every scene is different. So, of course, you learn more on set, there's no question. But I think it's a great starting ground, of course, because it gives you, I think it formalizes your learning in a profession which actually is very hard to formalize because, again, it's so esoteric. So I think it's a nice way to discipline yourself to actually understand that there's a lot of learning that goes into this. So it
Hmm.
was a great way to kind of narrow my focus and then make me realize that this is something I need to study now for the rest of my life. It's not that you ever, whether you go to film school for 6 months or 3 years, I don't think you ever know enough because everything's changing. And it's, whether it's the history of cinema to the technology of cinema to the technology of equipment, to every film that's made every year is a learning ground for us.
Right.
It is a dynamic education process. So, of course, you learn much more on set than you would in film school.
So it's an academic pursuit, but you're not learning in the classroom necessarily.
Always.
Yeah. So, you'd gotten to NYU. What was it? Did you know you wanted to be behind the camera? Were there other routes you were contemplating? Or was it, I'm going to be behind the camera. This is my thing.
So I think what I had narrowed it down to, and this was just purely accidental, it's not something I thought through. I kind of enjoyed sound design a lot, and it was camera. So it was between the two.
Hmm.
But I think the entire, the physical or the physicality of actually being the one who creates the image. You take a written word, and you're the person actually who gets to draw out the narrative and you
Mm-hmm.
make the visual images. And at the end of the day, filmmaking is a visual medium. So to have that control and to be the person who translates a written word into the image, that to me, I think, was so exciting. And at that point, I think when I started thinking of it in that manner, there was nothing else that came even close to it.
Right. So you finished these 6 months at NYU. You head back to India. What's that? What was it like? Did you get jobs immediately? How'd you look for jobs? What was that process like?
So even when I had decided that I wanted, by the time I was done with NYU, I think I was quite clear that I wanted to get into cinematography, as clear as I could be at that point. And even the professors at NYU, when I was, they would ask everyone, "You're heading back to your home countries. What are you planning to do?" And when I said cinematography, as cocky as I was like, I'm just going to go back and do that. And I remember the professor telling me at that point, and he said, please don't take this the wrong way. And I don't know what the scene is like in India. This was 1997.
Mm-hmm.
He said, even in America at this point, it's very hard for a woman to be a cinematographer. I don't know what it's like in India, but always remember that. This isn't something that you can take for granted. It is a profession that is predominantly men at the moment. So just keep that at the back of your mind. And I was like, out of here. I don't need to listen to anything, anyone. Came
Yeah.
back to India, luckily got a job as an AC with a really, really actually fine advertising cinematographer called Gopal Shah, who was at that moment at the prime of his career. And I was very fortunate. I started out as third AC and I climbed up. And it was fine at that moment because I think when you're ACing, and in India at that point, you AC'd with one person over years and years. It wasn't a freelance job really because there weren't so many around. So it worked out fine. And I think the first slap in the face you get is when you get out to be independent and you're
Mm.
not, literally firing the gun off somebody else's shoulder and you need to get work by yourself. I think which was the first realization that it's a very different place for a woman as opposed to a man.
Work by yourself, meaning you as DP on some
Independently
shoot.
as a team. Yes, yes.
And did you just rely on someone taking that gamble on you and taking that risk of saying, you know what, you haven't done anything before, or you've been in AC before, but come, be the DP on this shoot? Was there someone who took that risk?
So when you start out, actually, and again in India, we don't have agents, and it isn't that organized system. I mean, it's just about starting. So it is word of mouth, and you work with your peers. And the time I became a DP was when music videos had just started out. Like there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of MTV that had just come into the country, and it was all young directors, and these were peers, and we'd all been assistants together. So you kind of became independent together, and those are the ones that gave you that break and gave you a shot because music videos are great learning ground, especially back in the day, because
Mm.
that's where a lot of experimentation happened. So we all grew together. So those were the people who did kind of give you a shot. It was people who were your peers.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd always thought I'd want to direct a music video if I could one day. That seems like a cool thing to do.
It is, and I think it's great because you're not working for a client. I mean, you are, but it's a music video, so you're allowed to experiment. You can make mistakes, and we all shot on film at that point. Remember, and it was
Yeah.
early days. We shot all our music videos on 35 mil film. So the only place that would allow you, it was like a teaching ground. You could
Mm-hmm.
underexpose, overexpose, do stuff like that. It still worked because it was a music video. You could just treat it creatively.
Yeah, and your client was a creative, not a producer or agency or something
Exactly.
like that. I imagine is
Exactly.
much more
So you weren't
thrilling.
afraid to fail, which I think is a big part of our learning ground. What happens is when you're learning in advertising or you're learning, I'd say advertising because that was a large part of my learning ground as well. You're always afraid to fail because you've got so many people sitting above you.
Hmm.
You've got the agency, you've got the client, you've got a director, producer, there's a brief, you are delivering. to a certain brief, and it's so tightly controlled because eventually you're selling a product, that you start becoming a bit afraid because the face has to look good and this and that. There's so many things. And I'm
Right.
really glad that my initial learning ground was in music videos because it made you completely unafraid,
Hmm.
and it allowed you to really push the boundaries and experiment, which you could then take it to, the film world and advertising world.
Interesting. So at this stage in your career, you just started as a DP on your own. Were you ever told, no, you can't do it, you're a woman, so explicitly? Or were there times where it was clear that that was holding you back?
So I think no one would ever say it to your face, but I think those doors just don't open for you. And I think there's also, when you are a DPO in any creative field, there's enough insecurity, as I'm sure you have, or any creative person always has, about, am I good enough? It's a freelance job. Am I good enough to just get the job? So of course, when you're starting out, there is a lot of that, just general insecurity, regardless of gender. So I always put it down to that maybe I'm not good enough to get the job. I'm just not good enough, not good enough. And then in hindsight, I think the older I got, and I would say in the last 7 or 8 years, is far more the time where I had the realization that it was to do with gender, because a lot of my peers, who we all started out at the same time, got very different breaks than I got. And I know my work is equal, if not better,
Hmm.
but I never get opportunities. I still don't. I think it's far more limited than what is available to people of, again, from my peers and even people who are lesser in terms of experience. I think men work with men, and there is that little clique in a boys' club, and I think we get a far smaller share of the work available.
Yeah, especially sort of just with the intense culture on set. I imagine it's so easy to make it a
Yeah.
boys' club. But was there ever a time where it almost felt like there was this huge obstacle in front of you, and you'd get sort of a crippling anxiety or inability to work, or did it motivate you to push your craft even farther at that point and do
Again,
better than any of the men could?
yeah, it's ignorance which kind of always held me in good stead, because I just
Mm,
never knew what was happening. It was always in hindsight. It was like, oh, wait, that's what was going on. I think while you're in that, you're so busy just trying to get by every day and just do the best job that you can at that moment, that you don't really have time to think about it as the macro picture. You're just looking at it as a kind of survival thing. And I think now, just
right,
being a little more experience and a little more distance from it, I can now look back and say, oh, wait, that's what was going on.
right. So you shot music videos, you shot commercial. What was the run up to the first feature, Barana? Like, how did
So again,
that
it was
come to fruition?
the director I worked with on Bara Ana, Raja Menon, who I now have a very, a great relationship with. We've done a lot of work together. Was a music video. So it was a
Mm,
music video that we shot together, which he hired me for. And we never worked together. We never met each other. I think he was just trying to crew up. But it's a music video. So again, even as a director, you're willing to take chances for a music video, because he was an advertising director at that point. So that's how we started. We did a music video, we did some commercials, hit it off completely. And I think it was really a meeting of our minds. And we just realized that it's instinctive almost, the communication.
mm-hmm.
What I would do on set was exactly what he wanted to see. What he wanted was how I liked it. So it just ended up being very, very kind of symbiotic. And that's what led up to the first feature film, which was a small little indie film that we made together. And I'm so proud of that film. It's a small little film, but I think I'm happy to look back and say, okay, we still wanted to do the right thing even back then. Sometimes you
Yeah,
look back at your work and you want to cringe at the kind of stories you wanted to tell. And I still look back and I was like, okay, it was all right. The
yeah.
kids were all,
Well, 10 years later, you got Parasite, which was shockingly similar, and did quite
yeah,
well.
exactly. It was just,
Um,
yeah, Bara Ana was so early in the day. No one wanted in India to see stories about poor people back then. It
uh,
was all Bollywood driven, and it was about, song and dance. And I think the kind of film we made really didn't have a market at that point. And I think a lot of people have seen it now and appreciate it.
right. I do just want to backtrack a little bit to the just sort of the nature of that relationship with Raja. Like as far as the art form goes, did it enable you to do things in new and unique ways to have that relationship with someone where you could bounce ideas off each other, and what's the importance of finding someone like that in the industry?
Trust. I think
Hmm.
that's the biggest part. If he trusts me and trusts my vision, and that's a huge thing, right? Because at the end of the day, he knows that I've also, at the end of the day, for a director, you need a DP who's got your back because you're running so many departments, you've got so many things to look at, and eventually it is a director DP relationship, which is like a marriage, and you need
Right.
to find someone who you know has your back on set, who will not only translate your vision and take it forward, but also as a person. Because at the end of the day, if that relationship doesn't work on set, and if that relationship is fraught with tension, nothing else will work on a film.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have that trust in each other, and he trusted me enough to allow me to experiment, which is what I do a lot of, and allowed me to just express myself because he knew that eventually, instinctively, we both had the same idea about storytelling. So I think if you have that and your hands aren't tied behind your back, it allows you just actually shine and flourish if the
Mm-hmm.
director trusts you.
Yeah. Have you found that is that something directors tend to do, or is it a lot of sort of caginess between director DP? Like I could see how a very good DP could threaten the ego of the director, and you'd butt heads very often.
So lucky, that hasn't happened with me yet. And I think I end up working with a lot of friends, or they've become friends, or we were friends before, because I think to me that's
You're
very
just so
important.
amicable. That's the problem. Everyone just loves working with you, don't they?
Oh my God, no, Arhan. I mean, you don't think that. No, that's not true, actually. I know, I think I choose very carefully who I want to work with.
Hmm.
Because to me, it's very important. At the end of the day, it's a human relationship.
Right.
We're making films, we're not working in a factory where you're churning out products. At the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, your film is as good as the human relationships on set. And that's very important to me, whether it's my crew going down or it's the crew, it's all the heads of department and the HODs. And your film is as good as the relationships between the creative people on set. I really believe that. And to me, it's very,
Yeah.
very important.
I mean, it's like an army. You're going to war together for a day or a month, and you need to have the
Exactly.
best team behind you. You need to know everyone is good at their job and is a good person at the end of the day.
But it's also, in an army, I think you can have people in the position of power and authority and kind of leading with a very different mindset. At the end of the day, this is also the kind of job that it is. It also requires a great amount of security. Creative people are insecure,
Hmm.
and at the end of the day, if a set is a secure place where people feel secure enough to feel creatively, they can express themselves, they're not going to get shot down, they feel like they're going to be coddled, because eventually creative people are fragile. So if you create an environment with each other which allows everyone to actually express themselves and work towards a common goal, that is the best atmosphere on a set.
Right. Yeah, well, this is interesting now. I guess we're shifting from your sort of come up as someone in the beginnings of the industry to now, you're this established leader on set. And just, drop a few of your leadership principles, how you like to lead on set. Have you ever encountered, I guess, I would imagine Indian men don't like having a woman at the helm too many times. How do you get around instances like that?
So I'll tell you what happens is there are two parts to that. One is within your own crew. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you become independent and you start your DP, you've been working with the same crew when you were an AC, and they've been testing you for very long, and you're being tested whether you're male or female. But I think as a woman assistant, you're being tested far more, of course. So they're already testing you, and they figured out whether every step of the way they figured out where you stand. And so by the time you become DP, hopefully by then you've got the trust of everyone who's going to work for you, which is a huge part. It's
Mm.
not only who you're going to work with, but all your crew by then. So that's an important part as well. And I think that kind of worked out all right, and that kind of worked out early on. And I think maybe different rules would apply because I was a woman. I think I had to be far more on top of stuff. I had to perform to different standards, but which is fine for me anyway. It's not something that was very troublesome. I love studying film. I love studying cinematography. I do it all the time. I do it every day. So to be on top of it and ahead of it was easy for me. When it comes to working with crew as a woman, I think you won't get hired by directors or producers who are uncomfortable to have a woman in a position of authority.
Mm.
So those are the jobs you're not going to get anyway. And if you've gotten the job, then they're already okay with it. Otherwise, they wouldn't hire you. So that kind of doesn't really happen on set where women are going to be, men are going to be uncomfortable having a
Right.
woman position of power.
And that's
You had
almost
you,
a really sad narrative, actually. It's
yeah,
quite
because you've already not,
disappointing.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so close-minded in the sense that those producers aren't even going to get to see what you're capable of at some point.
Of course, and I know there are probably a majority of producers are like that. They don't, it's uncomfortable.
Mm,
It's like, God, I don't know what it's going to be like to have a woman on set. Are we going to have to be careful about the language we use now? Is it not going to be a boys' club when we go out of town for, a shoot? Can we not drink together? Can we drink together? How is this bro code going to work, which is a large part of a film set? So I think they're just like, you know what, screw it, forget it. It's just too much to think about.
yeah,
So let's not engage with that. And there are some who are like, wait, there's a whole other perspective here, and slightly more evolved people, and those are the ones to work with.
right. Little do they know you could drink them under the table if you wanted to.
Exactly. Always important is a DP.
Exactly. Yeah, most important in any film set, I think.
Any film set, exactly.
Um, so now you've. I guess let's dive into Laura Studios a little bit. I don't know. I think the story is really cool with Granddad at least converting the old silk mill into a couple of photography studios, and it explodes into this big, one of the biggest, I'd say at this point, studios in the country. What has your journey there been like? How's it been sort of navigating, I guess, from the other side, right? Almost being in the businessy producer type of role has got to be even more inhibiting on some levels as a woman, to sort of make those handshake deals with all these men in power. And what was that like?
So what's been really fortunate is this is a business that's run by your uncle and myself. That's my
Yeah.
brother. And because of what I do, and I'm a creative person, I work in creative side of the film industry. I realized very early on that that part of the business made me very uncomfortable. Also, because a lot of the people one would have to work with and make deals with were people I had to work for on a film set. The same producers who would hire me
Mm-hmm.
were coming to Alora to hire a studio. So I actually skipped out of that entire negotiation process very early on.
Mm-hmm.
Also, because as my brother had to remind me, he's like, whose side are you on, really? He was very confused. Well, I'm the crew side. I said, I'm not a
Yeah.
producer. I'm not a studio owner. I'm the crew. I said, so every time any decision had to be made, I was always looking at it from the crew side. And which is what I think one of the successes of the studio is
Hmm.
that uh, it's catered to make an environment very conducive for people to make films. That is fundamentally what the approach is, and that is how we take it forward. Yes, it's a business and it's going to make money, but I think at the end of the day, because I come from the creative side of it, and I realize how awful film studios are in India, and the atmosphere is just terrible. The working conditions, even just what studios are like, what the facilities are like. And I think it was very important for us to make something that would again make the creative process or be conducive to making the creative process as comfortable and pleasant and positive as we could, because a set is a very hard place. So we approach it from that is the primary angle we approach it from. And I think that is a large part of our success because it is filmmaker above all. Everything else will happen, but to make sure that the filmmakers and the crew gets every possible thing that they
Hmm.
can to work well.
Right. So your experience on the other side of the industry was ultimately what let you guys be so successful. So are you pretty hands off on that part of your life now? Do you sort of leave it to my uncle, your brother, or do you try
So I am
and
hands on to the creative part of the studio because, as you know, the studio is not just, it's not empty backlots and empty shooting floors and sound stages. These are sets that we construct and we keep them standing for like years on end. So there are various houses and hospitals and things like that. These are sets that are ready to shoot in and are almost lit. It's all designed with floating and moving walls so that people can keep recreating stuff. And so that's the kind of studio it is. So I'm very hands on in the creative side of the studio, which is a large part of it because that's our product. We
Mhm.
don't have any sound stages. So I keep away from the business and financial stuff. And I think everyone heaves a sigh of relief that I do because I think we would make no money if I was involved in that.
Yeah.
I stick to my end of the business.
Uh-huh. All right, so I guess that's the second element in your life, and the last and final big one, aside from me, obviously, would be the underwater stuff. What sort of made you want to do that? How does one get into that? That's such a niche market, I guess.
Again, it was just one of those things that happen accidentally, and it's the question always gets asked, which was first? Were you diving first and then a cinematographer, or the other way around? But I was a cinematographer first, and
Mm-hmm.
there was this great ad film director in India, one of the greatest ever actually. He runs a diving school, and he told us about it, and he said, well, we're getting equipment in India, underwater camera equipment, and there is no one who knows how to use it, and you kids just don't do anything exciting. Go learn how to dive. And it was Vishnu, my husband at the moment, at the point, sorry. Both of us went and we learned how to dive. And that was the beginning of our first underwater shoot, where we went back to the islands of India for like 2 months after we had done 11 dives with this huge Hydroflex 35 mil housing. Didn't know which way was up actually. And we put it on dive instructor's head, and we kind of panned it like that and operated it to get our buoyancy right. And that was it. We got thrown literally into the deep end. And that was the beginning for it for me.
Yeah, wow. I guess I never really, I kind of thought the diving might have started recreationally, but it started specifically for
Yes.
the purpose of
Yeah.
film, and then it
Yeah.
became recreational after.
Yeah. But still, just going by the way it's been, I love diving now. I love it recreationally, but a large part of my diving happens in a swimming pool,
Hmm.
and it happens on these underwater sets that we create for all these action sequences and things like that. So, shamefully, I haven't been out into the sea in about 5 years, but into the swimming pool every month to shoot
Wow.
underwater.
Will Laura ever get any underwater sets?
We're thinking about it actually to create a soundstage with like an underwater tank. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that is I keep thinking if not they do that, sorry, if we do that, who am I going to yell at when the pool is dirty? So I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, that seems like a production. And you're pretty close with Anise, right, over at Underwater
That's
Film
right. Yeah.
Services.
So, it's better to have facilities. Also, because I think sometimes when you get so involved in the other side of a business that you demand certain standards from,
Mm.
then I always worry that the compromise will be that I will be then willing to accept something that isn't perfect because I have vested interest in the financial side of it. And that always makes me a bit nervous.
Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me of your photography a little bit. And people don't know this, but you are ultimately the one who taught me how to take photos. And it was when we were traveling and that kind of thing. And I don't know if you remember this. At some point, I had asked, why still photos? You do all this videography stuff for your job. And you'd said to me, you said, I work with the most expensive high-end equipment when it comes to the video at the end of the day. I can't fathom the idea of, taking a video on some small camera and doing that, and it might mess up, the standards for my actual work, which I thought was interesting. And it represented almost this loyalty to your craft that, you don't get to see very often. And it was very cool. Um, but I'm curious too, because I know still photography at least is like therapy for me, and it seems like it's a big part of your life too. Do you try and get out as much as you can, shoot stills? How did that play a role, if it did?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that's a really interesting way of putting it. It is like therapy. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's such a distillation of, our work is so noisy, and we work on these huge sets with this big equipment, with a big crew, and everything is such a production. I mean, a production is such a production
Yeah.
that it's nice to be able to, because at the end of the day, I am an image maker and I'm a visual person, and it's not just about work, but that's what I love to do. It's a passion. So I think still photography, and it ends up being black and white photography. And I think it is for a lot of cinematographers because it's just taking away all the noise,
Hmm.
all the excess, and just, paring it down and honing it down into that one singular frame as opposed to what we do where we're creating multiple frames. And I think it allows your mind to just, it's like meditation and therapy
Yeah.
and all of that, where you just pare down everything and everything is focused on that one particular frame as opposed to us being able to create multiple frames at a time and do movies. I think you have to be so much more precise. And what a lot of what I do is for still photography is street photography.
Right.
It's not studio. I don't do still photography as in commercially. I do it far more recreationally and just as a
Yeah.
passion. So I think what it makes you do again is just focus on that one. You have to find that one moment, and I think it makes you more precise generally, even for your work and outside, because we can kind of muddle through the moments and create. You can
Yeah.
get a scene out of it, but to find that one frame in that 24, which actually expresses what you're trying to say in that entire moment, is
Right.
it's great for us because it just I think it's like meditation.
Yeah, it is. And walking, it's the best way to walk around a city and experience it, I
Yeah.
think. But that's a really interesting point, and I actually think it ties in a bit to the, your history and as far as learning on film as opposed to digital, because if you're shooting on film, you don't get to review it immediately. You don't get to shoot it over 1,000 times. It is, as far as video goes, it's a lot more of that, this is our one chance. Do you think that it was like a beneficial experience to have you learn on film? Do you think that people now learning on digital are losing a lot of the valuable lessons that film taught you?
Absolutely, and I think this is. I want to clarify because this, what you're asking is not that question about which is better, film versus digital, and that's not what
Mm-hmm.
I'm answering. But I think what you're making a very valid point is about the lessons, and yes, about the discipline. You had X number of film cans because they cost so much money, and every take that you did, you rolled camera. Firstly, there was a sound of the camera rolling. You literally were primed into action. You looked through the viewfinder, the entire world faded away, and you took that shot and you cut immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to have a memory of exactly what had happened in that time. Of course, there was video playback, but it was still a low res playback of what you had captured. Only you knew what you had done at that moment. And video playback, I always say, is for everybody else, but not for the cinematographer, because only you know what you've shot. And you have to remember the light and the exposure and all of that stuff, and remember if you need another take. And I think you focus so hard at that moment that discipline, I think, is now getting lost, because firstly, even for us, when you're shooting digital, you're looking at a monitor and you can still see the entire world around you. So very often I take a black cloth and I shut myself in, because just to focus on that particular moment and not everything that's going on out of frame. The reason we put our eye on a viewfinder is because everything else is then not important at that moment, but except for what you're looking through. And with digital, you're suddenly seeing too many things. That's one part of it. And I think the second part of it is the part of just rolling recklessly and continuously and not knowing where your take is. And just, it's like, oh, keep the camera rolling. And I think anyone who's shot on film cringes at the sound of that, because there's no on and off then. You just keep going at it. Actors get fatigued. We get fatigued. I don't know when I'm supposed to then switch on and off, like which is the beginning and the end of the take. So
Right.
I think the lessons which are very valuable. Going to get into whether film and digital is better. I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I imagine with digital, right, you can sort of tweak right in the moment. If you got your exposure slightly wrong, it's an easy fix. But with film, it's a big problem at the end of the day. And it almost seems like people who learned on film will be able to take advantage of digital better than people learning on digital. If
You know,
you,
it's a discipline thing, and I think maybe it's about the rigor of it when you
mm,
come from the world of film. And I think that's what I see in common with everyone who's learned on film, whether they're directors, whether it's production designers. But if you've worked in the world of film, I think that rigor that you can bring onto a set. And again, no one is making qualitative judgments on someone's skill or how much better they are with digital and if they've learned. But I think the rigor that we bring onto set is very different, and that's hard to replicate. And that is something I see very different from people who've learned on digital.
right. Yeah, that's super interesting. You think you'd ever shoot a movie on film now, or do you think digital has played a really big part in the things you do shoot?
Well, I think I would still love to shoot a movie on film. So if I still had my way, I'm shooting a film next year, which is a war film again. And if I had my way to do it, I would shoot all the daylight stuff on film, and I would shoot all the low light stuff and the interiors on digital,
Right.
because I think that's where we're still at, and
I see.
especially for the Indian sun right now. Uh, you know, um, Film is still, I think, the way it balances highlights and all of that is still, to me, to my eye, far more organic and more pleasant. but low light with digital just wins. I mean, there is no comparison.
Mm-hmm. And I think that technology has come a long way, and this is something I think is cool, and I'm sure other people do too. But how has the Ari Alexa, now the Alexa Mini, has it enabled you to do things that you might not have been able to do with bigger cameras, with film canisters, and all that kind of thing?
It's actually a myth that the cameras have become smaller. Of course, with the Mini, the cameras have become smaller,
Yeah.
but good film cameras where you have the small ones like the Arhaan and stuff like that, or even a 35 mil Arri camera, they're just so beautifully balanced that they felt a lot smaller, and you're far more mobile with them. These cameras have just become so big, and I was shooting handheld on an Arri, Alexa LF yesterday, and it's like up to here. So it
Mm,
makes you behave in a very different way. Your body works very differently. It's not, you can't just pick it and take it lower and higher. So it's actually become a lot bigger and a lot more unwieldy because you're constantly tethered to cables and no, it hasn't become any easier. I would rather have the ergonomics of a film camera translated into the digital world.
interesting. Yeah. Have you shot with the Mini yet?
Yeah, yeah, all the time, all the
Okay,
time.
because it's relatively new, right? It came out when they were shooting 1917, I think, and that was part of the reason they
The
were able to
Mini
do it.
LF during
Oh,
1970.
okay.
Yeah, so that's a large format one that's come out recently. I've worked with it a lot this year. Well,
Hmm.
pandemic notwithstanding, but still, beginning of the year
Right.
now, I'm back doing a lot on it. It's outstanding, and I think what Ari's done with whether they were working on film cameras or digital, I think I will be, an Ari person for a long time to come.
Hmm.
It's like the
Well, yeah, this is a good transition, I think, into, at least from what I've discerned in my conversations with you, there's a one cinematographer who I think we all tend to, look up to more than anyone, and that would be Deakins. Um, And I guess I'm just sort of curious, what role have you tried to emulate him at all? Like, have you learned lessons from what he's shot? Are there any other cinematographers who, you try and take a couple lessons from here and there? Like, what are the big
So I think,
influences on you?
yeah, to make a distinction between emulate and take lessons from, because
Hmm.
I think we all try to take lessons from other work that we've seen, and of course, we take it from. It could
Well,
be the big.
there's the Tarantino quote about film people. Let's not forget, which is what is it? It's good artists to emulate, great artists steal. So no harm in that.
Exactly. No, absolutely. But I think emulate is hard because every piece of work that you're working on is so unique in itself that one can take lessons, I think, from what you've seen other people do. But it applies so uniquely to that particular experience and that particular job that
Hmm.
you can steal little techniques and things like that. But I find it very hard to emulate other cinematographers because I think the narrative work speaks to each person so individually that you
Right.
can take lessons. But what you're going to do with it eventually is going to be unique.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Who are sort of your favorites out there, though, aside from Deacons?
Well, I think there's so many, Arhan, and I think the again, I I can't really name cinematographers and say, I look at everyone's work. We all look at American cinematographer. We all watch films all the time. I like what so much of the new work that's going on, the new contemporary style of storytelling. But I just wouldn't be able to pick one person anymore
Hmm.
because there's so much. There's also so much work happening from new young people that I don't
Right.
even know who they are. And I think with the change in technology and just the amount of cameras available, the small ones, the tiny ones, that it's nice to be open to what everyone's doing because narrative storytelling is changing just by the size of the equipment available, where you can take it, where you can put it. So it's nice to see all of this as well, and not just get stuck on old school big cinematographers.
Right. So, are there any big women cinematographers you've looked up to, or is it so early in this sort of expansion of women into film that we haven't even seen really
So,
anyone big yet?
and from the earlier days when I started out, there was this one hallowed name from uh, Hollywood, Nancy Schreiber, who kind of paved the way for what was going on even there. And I remember, looking up because there were no role models in India at that point.
Hmm.
But it wasn't something that I had even at that point thought that there was something that was unique in itself that women cinematographers would have breed unto themselves. I've realized that now, and I've realized the value of that community of women cinematographers actually holding each other and becoming a community and supporting each other, because it is really a little oasis.
Hmm. So yeah, talk about IWCC a bit here. I guess that's a good transition, which for those of you who don't know is the Indian Women's Cinematography Collective, right? Um, and you were one of the founding members, correct?
That's right. There were four of us who
So
actually found this.
yeah, so sort of what's the role of that? What's it trying to do? What are some of the initiatives you guys have taken?
So, when we started this out, I think it's in its fourth year or fifth year. We
Hmm.
started this out pretty much, and all the ones who started out, we're all around the same age. We all, they were in film school when I had started out. Like, we were all around the same time. So, we've all had the same journey pretty much, but we didn't know of each other's existence again because there wasn't so much communication back in the day. And I think the idea was to create a creative safe space for women and a community for women to share and exchange and be able to feed off each other, to come and share ideas and stories and problems that happen on set. If there's any harassment, if there's any bullying, if you want, women actually find it very difficult to approach men for even technical help or to ask them. That kind of, there is a difference in the way women approach it, the way, and you're not hanging out together and drinking in bars and things like that. So that community, it is a different community. So the idea was to create some sort of place, and it has been one of the greatest joys of my life. It has been so successful. We have a community, I think it's all over the country now. Every woman cinematographer pretty much that one knows of is part of this, and we have a very active WhatsApp group, because we find that actually being such an immediate response space, where if you need help, you want to say something, you want to reach out for any technical information, somebody will respond in the group and you will get help as soon as you ask for it. We have a
Mm,
website, everyone's hosted, so it's really been quite something.
that's awesome. What are the ways it sort of helps? Does it help these up and coming women sort of elevate to higher statuses and break through barriers? Like, talk about ways you could do that.
I think what it does is it provides a community. And I think for every creative person, what is important is to be part of a community. It's
Right.
very isolating otherwise. Filmmaking is a very isolating world because it's not an organized industry where you have your peers and you have anywhere to go to reach out, to have a creative exchange, to see each other's work, to help each other, or to complement each other. It doesn't exist. So I think what we've been able
Mm,
to do in a very small way is to provide that community for creative people where you actually can be held pretty much. And your work, you can exchange work, you can ask each other technical ideas, you can generate work. A lot of work is generated because DP is looking for ACs, come onto that group. AC,
uh,
looking for other ACs. I need a second AC, or I need an operator on this day. So much work is generated. And I think what it's done in a very small way is to create a platform or a community which doesn't actually exist, I think, anywhere in the world. And it's like a little microcosm of, well, I would say some form of like an Airbnb or an Uber for cinematographers.
yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, I think there's a lack of sort of this collaboration in the industry almost. It just tends to isolate people, which is natural for any freelance profession, I think. But
But I think, what we've discovered is that the value of having that safe space, of course, it
mhm,
is, freelancers are generally isolating. There's a lot of insecurity between creative people. But once you realize that actually by sharing information, everyone gets to be better and everyone's work, like I'm learning so much from all the younger DPs because they have far more, information about the new technologies in terms of the smaller cameras. I don't know that stuff. And I
mm,
think when you realize that everyone benefits from a kind of collab, a space where everyone can share and a creative community and platform, it only gets better. And it's unfortunate it doesn't exist.
right. Well, that's interesting because I've always found, a lot of creatives tend to shield themselves from community almost on their own by letting their egos get so big, which they almost have to, right? You're putting, every year you're basically putting your baby out into the world where it's like, I have to get this out there and not have too many people reject it. And it's a frightening thing to do. So it's very easy to shield yourself off. Was there sort of a moment, or was that something you did? Did you ever have to sort of shed the ego and be like, I can learn from these people. It's not just
You
criticism.
know, I didn't, no, I don't think I have an ego firstly when it comes to my work. And I think it's incredible actually if creative people just let themselves be held by their communities and
Mm-hmm.
you allow yourself to be celebrated by your people. And if you feel secure enough within it, and I know because so many people have films releasing now and they put out their trailers into IWCC first, and you have everyone's reaction there. And the minute you know you're being celebrated and held, and then you go out as a community and you let your work out, it benefits everybody.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it seems very difficult to build that community almost starting in the industry. Yeah, I don't know. At least the experiences I've had on set, you kind of, if you want to rise, you almost have to believe you're the best. But in a way, it's like, you just shed it. You be like, here's what I can learn from everyone around me. And you do that. You
Absolutely. And
take that leap.
that insecurity as well of, you know what, and also that thing that if I share my secrets, other people are going to get to know it.
Mm,
And uh, and I think cinematographers have that a lot less, Arhan, which is why you have associations like ASC, which is a community for cinematographers. They have a magazine. The biggest films of the year publish their cinematographers publish entire articles on how they shot a film with great detail, and they're very happy to share. So I think for some reason, cinematographers kind of belie this fact of creative people not wanting to share. But in
mm,
every other part of the industry, it doesn't exist. And it would be incredible if, and people always look at cinematographers, say it's unbelievable how you have this community everywhere in the world. Cinematographers will always share, but no other directors won't share and production
yeah.
designers won't share. And if it did, and if people kind of shed that and believe that they were part of one larger community, even though you're fighting for the same piece of work, but just shed that entire insecurity, I think everyone benefits from that.
Yeah. That's almost the purest love you can have for the art form.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you know that the cinematographer community was like that going in, or was it something you just sort of got lucky with? Because it's really, I imagine it's very comforting to have sort of that embrace in the community.
I didn't know it, of course, when I was getting in, but it seems to be a recurring theme all over the world. Cinematographers will always share with each other over countries, over continents. I've written to cinematographers I don't know. I found their addresses somewhere and said, that's great work. And congratulations on that job. I've got mails like that from people in other countries. For some reason, it doesn't exist with cinematography, or is a lot less.
Hmm. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, there's big US news, obviously. We have an Indian woman as vice president. So I guess I'll ask here at the end of this little session, give us your Kamala Harris speech, your sort of motivational speech to, I don't know, women who want to get in the industry, maybe people who want to get into more complicated technical roles. What advice can you offer them?
I think, why it's only been a day since she made that speech. And I think, to paraphrase, because what she said was so interesting about, people might not be comfortable seeing you in certain roles, like women in cinematography. That's because they haven't seen you in roles like that before, but it doesn't
Mm,
mean that it can't happen. So, and I think what happened with me is also just the ignorance and the blinders of just, go about, do what you have to do. Just go ahead and do it, and then look back and see how you manage to do it. But
right.
I think some trepidation and too much knowledge about what people have done and what they haven't. I mean, if you're really passionate about it, go out and do it, and then look back and figure out how you did.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So, lastly, I guess tell us what you got going on. What's in the pipeline? What can we look forward to?
Well, it's funny because I think woman cinematographer, the cliches of what I would be expected to shoot, of course, a war film. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm getting into. Then. It's a period war film based in 1971.
Yeah.
It's on the
Well,
India-Pakistan
it's
war.
nothing you haven't done before. You did Airlift. I kind of avoided talking about it. I feel like anyone who knows you has heard enough about it at this point.
Exactly. So
Although it's
comes
a great movie. Yeah.
yeah, here comes another one. And we're in the middle of prep for it. It's still soft prep, and we start filming in April. So that's what I'm in the middle of. Very
And
excited.
this is the war film with Raja again.
Yeah, exactly. I think
So
he's the only one who hires me. So
yeah, bands back together. You know what? If it's anything like the past few, it'll be a good watch.
I know. I hope so.
Well, thank you for being here for episode one. Taking yet another risk, I guess.
Exactly.
But
I
I'm
don't have
excited.
this. This is nepotism or some reverse of it or some form
Yeah,
of it.
I don't know. It's something. It's
It's
something.
some,
Yeah. But you know what? Got to do what you got to do.
exactly. And that was a great chat, Arhan. We've never really had a formal chat about film like this, and I
No, we
really,
haven't.
really
Yeah, no, it was awesome. I definitely learned a lot. I think it gave me a lot of insight into, what we're trying to do, what we can do. I think it was productive.